Good morning. Today's topic will be on conditional probability. So for today's agenda, I'm going to go over the explore, then we're going to learn some new notation and end this with an example. So taking a look at the explore, the following data represents the number of men and women passengers aboard the Titanic and whether or not they survived. So here the first three questions are review from yesterday's assignment. So let's go ahead and attack them. Number one, if one person is selected at random, what is the probability that a passenger was in first class? So we have to focus on first class because that's the event that we're interested in. And we see that first class is right here on the left, which means in order to get the total, we're going to have to go all the way right here to the right. And we have a total of 324. So our probability is going to be the number of possible ways over the sample space, and the sample space is going to be 1,317. If we input this in the calculator, I get an approximation of 24.6%. Okay, now let's talk about the second problem. What is the probability that a passenger survived? So survived is my event. Survived is right here on the top. In order to get the total, I'm going to have to go all the way to the bottom. And now I have a 500 as my new total, or the number of ways in which people survived. That sounds a little bit weird, but here we have 500 over the sample space of 1317. So the probability that a passenger survived is approximately 38%. Now let's look at this final one right here. What is the probability that a passenger was in first class and survived? So here we have an intersection. We have probability of first class and survived using the probability notation. So first class and survived is going to correspond to this intersection right here, these 201 passengers. So here the probability is going to be 201 all over my sample space of 1,317, and here I get an approximation of 15.3%. Let's move on to the more challenging questions, which is what the Explorer was intended for, so that you can think a little bit. For the remaining three problems, we're going to have to pay special attention onto how the question was written. For example, here it says, if one passenger who survived. So let's underline that part. If a passenger who survived. So then here, this begs the question, how many people survived? Well, that's 500. So here, if one of the passengers who survived is randomly selected, what is the probability that this passenger was in first class? So out of these 500 people, how many of them were in first class? So here, we see that these 201 passengers were the people that survived being in first class out of these 500. So the probability here is going to be 201 out of the 500 that survived. So here you can see that the sample space got reduced to just this part right here. We're dealing with a new subset of the sample space, that being the total amount of people that survived. We don't care about the ones that didn't survive. Okay, so here we have 201 over 500, and putting this in the calculator, I got an approximation of 40.2%. Let's try this one more time. If one passenger who survived, so again we're looking at this part, right? So here we're given some extra information. If one passenger who survived is randomly selected, what is the probability that this passenger was in third class? So now we got to look at the third class passengers, and we have 181 now. So out of the 500, 181 were in third class. So the probability of them surviving turns out to be 36.2%. Okay, so now let's look at the punchline here, because this is how the problems are going to be worded more or less. We have, what is the probability that the passenger survived given that the passenger was in first class? So this time we were given that the passenger was in first class. So given that the passenger was in first class, how many of those survived? So let's find our given. So the passengers in first class, that's these 324. Now, out of these 324, how many of them survived? Well, now we're going to look at the items right here. Actually, let me draw this little circle representing my new subset of first class passengers. And out of these 324, 201 survived. So my probability is going to be 201 over 324. So we got 201 over 324, and that is approximately equal to 62%. Okay. So notice that when we are informed that something has occurred, our sample space changes, and that's the topic of today. What happens to our probability when we're given a certain condition? And for that, we're going to have to learn some notation so that we are capable of knowing when it is that we need to find these conditional probabilities. So let's begin by introducing this notation.